to be here with you all again. I'll let you get settled. But the time is at hand, right? Beth?
It sure is.
Yes, and so I'll open us by reading from the Gospel of Luke, the 10th chapter, the story of the Good Samaritan, which takes place on the road to Jericho, which is on the road from between Jerusalem and Jericho. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read?" And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have answered right. Do this, and you will live." But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was. When he saw him, he had compassion, and went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back." Which of these 3 do you think proved neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? He said, "The one who showed mercy on him." And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." Word of the Lord. And I'll open with a prayer of St. Jerome. And St. Jerome is known as being one of the earliest translators of the Bible. He's was considered one of the first 4 doctors, meaning revered scholars of the church. And in about the year 385, he, after a long life of Christian studies in different places, both Rome and Alexandria, he ends up in Bethlehem, which is where he's, the older he got, the more and more he felt called to live an ascetic life. He starts, he's actually a convert to Christianity, as would have been the case for a number of people in Rome at that time. And so he comes from a fairly boisterous life as a young man. And the older he gets, the more and more he's interested in leading a increasingly ascetic life, monastic life. And after being in Alexandria, where he has access to a lot of the ancient scriptural texts, he goes to Bethlehem and translates the Bible into Latin, which is the equivalent for our time of translating it into English. He's translating the Hebrew and the Greek into common vernacular, and that's the Vulgate translation, which is famous as being, for the longest time, the standard translation of the scriptures. And what's interesting about Jerome is he becomes so associated with Palestine in about the year 385, which is close to the year he dies. The tradition holds, makes this translation in a cave next to the church where it's built, that Constantine's mother has built over the cave where Jesus was born, the manger. And that's one of the things that we should be able to see there. And I wanted you to know why there's that attention to Jerome there. It's because he's such an important translator of the scriptures and a person of great devotion. He's a guy who's pictured often at a table writing with a skeleton, skull there on the table with him in Italian art. But this is his and he prayer, and in this prayer, this is one of many of his prayers, he talks about this journey from Jerusalem to Jericho. O Lord, show your mercy to me and gladden my heart. I am like the man on the way to Jericho, who was overtaken by robbers, wounded, and left for dead. O good Samaritan, come to my aid. I am like the sheep that went astray. O good shepherd, seek me out and bring me home in accord with your will. Let me dwell in your house all the days of my life and praise you forever and ever with those who are there. Amen. I hope that we get to see the cave where Jerome is supposed to have lived there. It's, I think, a testimony to others who have made pilgrimage to Bethlehem and to Israel before us, and who have been so moved and called by it. Some have lived out their lives and died there in those various spots. I hope that doesn't happen to you. But think about it, it could. There's Christian precedent for it, that going there you're so moved that you feel called to stay and live out your life in devotion in that spot. Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of an exciting thought, isn't it? Yeah. So that has not happened on the last 2 trips I've taken, but it happened to Jerome on the way. So today I hope we have a chance to do a little bit of catch up and to talk and answer some questions. And I want to share with you particularly some of the substance of the conversation that Beth and I had on a phone call of about 90 minutes with Mike and Claire, because you didn't talk about that last time at all, right, Beth?
Right, we did. You covered the first half of it in one video, but not the second half.
So the phone call, we got to talk with Mike Berghoff in Jerusalem, who's our guide for the trip, and as Rich remembers, he's the same guy who was our guide last time. And I was reminded of what a good-natured, pleasant person he is. And his English is a bit British, but actually South African. While he describes himself as a Jerusalemite, meaning a citizen of Jerusalem, even a step beyond being a citizen of Israel. Jerusalem being, in addition to the old city there, something of an international city. He has this considerable time that he lived in South Africa as well. But he's just funny. He's full of banter and jokes, and I had forgotten that and enjoyed the time we spent together on the phone. One of the things, there are several things I was asking him for and asking his opinion on. And one of them was out of our conversation, particularly with Marcia and me, about the synagogue and the evolution of synagogues in Nazareth. I asked him if we could visit, in addition to the Basilica of Mary in Nazareth, the Church of the Synagogue. Now, I had never been there. So I didn't know, just about how far it was. And he said, yes. He said, that's certainly doable. It's within easy walking distance. And so he said, sure, we'll do it. Let's plan on it. And I wanted to do that because the synagogue functions so much in the Gospels as a place where Jesus is teaching and preaching. And while he said to me, and I won't say debate, but dialogue about it, we're going to see one in Capernaum. And the one that we see in Capernaum is archaeologically, we're sure, the site of an actual synagogue with other synagogues built on it over time. And most likely, strongly likely, the synagogue that's referred to that the centurion had built for the people there. But it's ruins, so it's just the pillars and the walls, and it's heavily visited. So you don't really get the feel of being in the kind of synagogue that Jesus was in Nazareth. And so to try and recreate something of that, there's another synagogue you can go to there that I have been to, but it's enough of a distance it would use up too much of our day in Nazareth, and this one is so close. However, you hear in the name of the synagogue church, the reality that what's happened is it's been turned into a church, which is sometimes troubling for Jews. And so I think that was a part of his, are you sure you want to do that? and I said, yes, I do, because I want them. He was making the point that the church that's there itself has changed hands several times. In fact, they think there was a mosque there on it at one point. But it looks more like, as I said in the video, what the synagogue that Jesus would have been in, even more than the ruins. And it's so different than the Basilica of Mary. To be able to get the two of them into one visit there seems meritorious to me. So he says we can do that, and I wanted you all to be able to do that. And I also asked him about seeing the Mount of the Precipice in Nazareth. And he said, I'm going to check on that. He said, that's a wonderful view. He said, but it's a bit further. He has to figure out sort of the travel time. And it's the mount that tradition says is the mount that they took Jesus to and tried to throw him off of at the end of that synagogue story from the Gospel of Luke. But it's a bit problematic because it's at somewhat of a distance from where the synagogues in downtown Nazareth would have been, so it doesn't quite fit in the story, you know, how they would have gotten there. But it is an extraordinary vista, and it's also, though, very much like the vista that we get from Megiddo. So he's going to look at the timing on that, but I told him I thought the synagogue church was more important because we can do so much of it at the same time on that. And he said, if I think that's too far to get to the Mount of the Precipice, then I'll set you up. It's kind of looking back the other way from the valley to look at Megiddo across that. As the same kind of view of that valley where the book of Revelation says Armageddon will take place there. It's just an extraordinary vista. I think, I've been trying to rack my memory, but anybody remember the movie Patton? Okay, remember that opening scene, how Patton begins? Remember, he's in Africa. I mean, he's in the Middle East. And I think it's that valley. And he starts to have this kind of deja vu flashback, and Patton had some.
I've been there.
Yeah. It's that kind of a valley where these historic battles have moved in and out of, looking over that valley there. I also asked Mike, I wanted you all to be able to see both the Church of the Multiplication of the Fishes and Loaves and the Church of what's called the Primacy of Peter, which is where Jesus makes his appearance in the resurrection. We didn't see that last time. We did see the multiplication of loaves. And he says, I don't think there's any problem with seeing both of them. The reason I want you to see both is because the Church of the Multiplication of the Fishes and Loaves, which is close enough to the Mount of Beatitudes that you could probably walk there if you needed to, but is the traditional spot where the miracle of the fishes and loaves takes place. And it's not that it's that extraordinary church, but it has these mosaic tiles there that are ancient. I think they go back to the year 527 and maybe earlier, so they're a clear Christian mosaic. And just to be able to get that close looking at actual Christian churches there, so we know that at least in that year they were saying that's where the fishes and loaves miracle took place, and the tiles that they were building into the floor are still there. There was about 3 years ago kind of a famous arson there. And it took place right when we visited, it had just taken place, and there were some Jewish extremists who were upset. It's been hard for me to gather exactly, as it is sometimes with extremists, what they were upset about. But whether they were upset with their sense of the encroachment of the Christian tradition on the Jewish homeland, but they were upset about something and they set fire to the place. And so at that time they were rebuilding and restoring some of what had been charred. But that's been repaired now, and we'll have even more access than we had before. And I asked Mike about the possibility of serving communion there. That seemed like such an appropriate spot with the fishes and loaves to share the sacrament of the communion. And so he has to call the church and check on that to see if that's something they'll allow us to do. The other church, the church itself is not as old as the mosaics on the floor, but it's such as I said before, much the likely spot by the sea where the resurrected pyramids takes place. That I wanted you to have that moment. He also told me that at the kibbutz in the mornings and in the evenings, we'll have time for me or one of the other pastors going with us to lead for those who want to come. All are invited, none are compelled, but to come to a devotion before breakfast there at the water at the Sea of Galilee. And the kibbutz, he said, is close enough that you can walk down to the water. And that you ought to be able, he said, to lead a time of devotion there. And in the evening, if you want to, when we get back from dinner as well. I want to. I just want to be able to see those moments. So I was pleased that he was sensitive to that, put that in. He also said then, when we asked him, that he would arrange for us to be able to stop en route after we leave Galilee and head towards Jerusalem at the River Jordan. And he was talking about where we wanted to do that, and he was sensitive. I told him I thought that we would, while I didn't think we wanted to spend several hours at the River Jordan having a worship service, I thought that you all would want to be able to touch it, to get your hands in it, to feel it. He said that he wanted to be sure it was a spot that he thought was clean enough for you to do that. You know, the River Jordan is a river that people are living along the side of, and so some spots of it are cleaner than others, and you know, the access to it, just like any river, has some spots that are accessible and some that aren't, but that's one that is. He said he can arrange that. And then I told him, not only did I want all of that, but I also wanted us to be able to enter Jerusalem while it was still light. I wanted you to see that vista of coming into Jerusalem. And he said, no problem. And I was surprised, you know, that he was able to guarantee that. But I thought he did with a conviction, didn't you? When he,
I think so.
Yeah. So I, last time, passed out copies of the song, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. You know, that's the hymn. And we sing it here, or the organist, when David Matthews was here, would play it every Palm Sunday, and invited folks to sing it as we entered into the city. And we did that both of the last trip. So I'll have that set up again. Then, because of some demand, we had not scheduled in an opportunity to swim in the Dead Sea. And I told him that I got some kickback from that, from some folks who wanted to float for a little bit in it. And I asked him if that was possible. I said, you know, we don't need to spend like 2 hours sunbathing there at the Dead Sea. And he said, actually, he said, I think we can do that. So he put in for those who want the swim in the Dead Sea opportunity. And so the only thing is, he said, they just have to come into it knowing that when they go into it, they're going to swim for a little bit in the Dead Sea, not to frolic at the Dead Sea for an extended period. So I was happy for that, because it seemed like the best of both worlds. Then he told me, we also, on that southern swing down to the Dead Sea and to the location of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that we would stop, and this is in the itinerary, but I hadn't seen it before. I wanted his opinion on it. I wanted to go there, but to go to the Inn of the Good Samaritan. And so it's in that story we just read from Luke, and it's just a traditional spot where the inn was. It's not to say it likely was the inn, but it does give you a sense of the rugged countryside and coming through that area, and the vulnerability of folks traveling along that road. And he said he thought folks that he had taken there before appreciated it. He thought that was a good thing to do. So I was glad that he was able to roll that in as well.
Yeah, that's not on the road between Jericho and Jerusalem, is it, or is it?
It is.
Okay.
Yes, and I've been trying to figure out, you know, exactly the geography of that, of how we do that, because in my mind's eye, we said head south from Jerusalem towards the Dead Sea and don't go by Jericho. The best I can figure is the road must go like that, you know, down and out like that. Although I guess it depends on where the inn is. I mean, I've actually driven by the sign for it, although I haven't seen it. But you know, the Inn of the Good Samaritan is not in Jericho. Right, and so it depends on where it is, you know, in that journey down. But I remember seeing the place where it was alongside the road, and wishing that we were able to stop there. What else am I forgetting, Beth, about what he told us? Oh, I know. Something I haven't done before that he has included in on the itinerary, I wanted to ask him about this time, was the Shabbat dinner. So Friday night is in the Jewish practice Shabbats, their Sabbath. And the culture, even for folks who aren't religiously practicing there, like Sunday here in a lot of ways, things close down, shut down. And so there's not as much opportunity after dinner to go out into the community because things are just door shut. And so many observant Jews are inside and keeping Shabbat there with their families. Even for those who aren't religiously practicing, it's a very large family gathering time. But they have arranged this program called Shabbat dinners, where dividing us into smaller groups, we're invited to go into the homes of observant Jews who share their Shabbat meal with us. And I said to him, I haven't done this before. Tell me, is this a good thing? And he said, oh, it's a highlight. And Claire chimed in too and said, yes, you want to take our word for it. You want to do this. We get really good reviews. They said it's a fairly personal experience because you're in people's homes. And they said the meal may not be as sumptuous, is that a word? Yeah, as you might find in a hotel buffet. But the experience of eating the Shabbat dinner in the homes of citizens of Israel and sharing with them together is worth it. And so I was happy to get their good affirmation of that and wanted to give you a heads up on that. I didn't ask him how we get there and how we get back, you know, and we got to him to figure out how we do that. But I was pleased with that. Then I wanted to say, Wendell had asked the question last time, was it possible for folks to go out to eat if they wanted to go out one evening, not eat at a hotel buffet and eat at a restaurant in Jerusalem? It certainly is. It's I think, possible in Jerusalem, probably not at the kibbutz. But in fact, if that's something that you're interested in doing, I would encourage it. I've eaten out twice at least, and I may have eaten out a third or fourth time in Jerusalem and just forgotten. But I remember two specific times having done that in nice restaurants, and both were in the old city. And so the people who I know have information about that with some detail as to hours, they keep records on that kind of thing and could make a good recommendation to you if you're interested. You could do that in groups of 4 or 6. It would be equivalent to going out in terms of the cost to eat here, as if you were going out to sort of Bonefish or above. It's fun. It's similar experience to going out and eating in a nice restaurant in Tampa in terms of the experience of the meal. But it is interesting what they bring to the table and the way in which the other people in the restaurant are eating there. And you can walk to those restaurants from the hotel. It's, sometimes might be a walk of half a mile, but if you don't want to walk it, you can take a taxi. And the only night that you couldn't do that would be Shabbat, and that's the night we're going to the Shabbat dinner anyhow. So I recommend it. And it's probably worth it. On a cost-benefit analysis, I would say do it and give up eating at the buffet one night, right? What else am I forgetting, Beth? I might want to mention it.
But we have our Genesis dinner as a group.
Yeah, he said about that, he was glad we were doing that, and the vista was worth the experience of it, to be at the tent, to look out towards the south, towards the Dead Sea, and he was affirming our choice to spend the time doing that. That's the same day that we come back from the site of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Dead Sea itself. Questions about it? Rich?
John, were you able to talk to Mike about our ability to go up to Temple Mount or maybe even into the mosque?
He said that they very much want us to do that, and that they would take us, illegal for us to do that. Well, and so he said, I simply can't control what demonstrators might do, you know, on that day. The day that we're to go to the Western Wall, the wall of the temple, is the afternoon, I think this is right, the afternoon of the Sabbath, isn't it? I don't have that itinerary in front of me, but that's what I'm remembering. And he said that was a particularly good day to go because it's visually very interesting. That there's you see a great deal of activity there on the part of the Orthodox priests and even the conservative and reform traditions that are sharing there at the Mount. And he was glad we were going on that day. So the push came to shove. He said it just had to do with if there was some sort of demonstration that caused them to shut it down. And you know, he said he did not think we were going at a particular time when that was likely. And so, you know, that's the good news on that.
John, when I was reading this chapter about the Bay Carols, the purple rocks, is that a possibility?
I don't know, I hope so. That's obviously a moving experience for Martin. And Robert Mims picked that up too. Mike, I've asked Mike to look into that. And there's two dynamics that are, I won't say impossible, but challenging for him. But the first one is, well, that's an important spot for Martin. It's not a large or a heavily traveled location in Israel, in Galilee. So it's very unusual for a guide not to be familiar with it. I mean, the guides in Israel are required to spend time significantly in education as a part of their certification, and Mike was not familiar with it. And that's the second time I've had that same experience with him. So part of his challenge in that is his hesitancy in taking us to a spot that he's not familiar with. That's and the second one that's a challenge for him is we'll be in a bus, and so it's kind of like now it gets to driving down 75, except it's not an interstate like that, but you have to have a place where you can pull the bus off and let everybody get out to get to the spot. And so he doesn't know. So he's not willing to do something that he's responsible for jeopardizing our welfare. In other words, he won't just pull off the side of the interstate and let us get off the bus. So there has to be, he's got to find out that they believe that it's a safe place to go and a real place to go, and that he can get us there and out in the bus safely. I did ask him, tell him that I wanted to be able to stop the boat. I wanted a boat that we were the only people on the boat, and I wanted to be able to stop the boat and let us drift for a bit. And he said he could arrange that, no problem on having us be the only people on the boat. He said to do that, we might have to leave at 8:30 that morning. And I made an executive decision and said, yeah, that would be fine. And he said, their full ability to stop the boat will depend something on the wind. And that it could be windy out there. It was windy that day. And so he said, they definitely can at least push the motor down as far as they can get it if they have to have some power to keep from just being pushed across the bay or the lake in it.
And longer boats, what kind of boats are there?
It looks like a great big kind of open shrimp boat. It's shaped kind of like that way, and it's open with benches along the side. And I forget whether the covering both times is canvas or teak, but and it's open all along the side. Maybe a little bit like about 4 times the size of the boats you go down the Amazon ride into Disney World. It's kind of an open jungle boat that way. But they are motored, and they're big, I guess they're diesel, they're big, engines that are pushing them. And so that's why I wanted them to be able to stop it for a bit. What other questions do you have that you want to ask about?
John, I know my Lee friends tell me that Hebron is a must visit. And I noticed it's never been part of our itinerary, and I suspect it doesn't have as much history with Christian religion as Jewish religion. But is it dangerous to go to Hebron? Is that something that why they don't do that?
I can't say. I can say what you're saying is I haven't been there, and it hasn't made the list of places I want to be sure to see, and I don't know, I don't have a good explanation as to why not. It could be dangerous. I mean, that's one possibility. You know, it could be why we're not going there, but I can't say that. I'll be glad to look into it.
But
Yeah.
it's supposed to be very, legend has it that it's the burial place of the patriarchs and matriarchs of the early Testament.
This next Sunday is, Rich, I will get to that, all right? Because it might be very accessible. I just don't know. If you'll help me remember that, Beth, to check on that with Mike. It could be, you know, someplace that we could just stop along our way and see. Right. This coming Sunday is Transfiguration Sunday. And that's the Sunday where we remember the story of Jesus going up on the mount with James and John and Peter and being transfigured by the light. I mention that because while that often is associated with Mount Moriah, which is another mount that we're not going by, Martin makes the point that a number of biblical scholars now associate it with the mount that we are going to see at Caesarea Philippi. And that's where we go up to the headwaters of the River Jordan in what's a national park in Israel. And that, the more I've thought about that, and I just mentioned that for you as we approach this coming Sunday in this Bible story, to be in that spot. The logic in it is that geographically, despite what tradition says about the mount, and the logic of the story geographically, that's where they are when that event happens. Because it's as far north as they go in the life of Jesus before they turn around, and it's at that point that Peter makes his confession. It's close to the point where Jesus says to him, "And who do you say that I am?" And Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." It's the declaration of his messianic status. And with that declaration, then he turns and begins the journey to Jerusalem, all the way back down. And so it makes sense that it would be at that spot as they begin that journey. And it's also a mountain, and a famous mountain, and where they are geographically in the story at that point. So I'm arguing for that now, but we'll see the Mount of the Transfiguration, and I'll get Mike to talk about that as well. I mentioned something in the video last week that I hadn't mentioned before, and so if you didn't get to see it, I guess it was the video the week before, because last week's was the video of the folks who spoke. But if you watch Netflix at all, you may be interested in watching this series, is it Age of Tanks? That's the name of it. And it's about tanks, the history of tanks. But I think it's the third episode of the Age of Tanks. They talk about this famous tank battle. Tanks, T-A-N-K-S. Kaboom, those kind of, tanks. They talk about, it's only about 5 episodes long, but I think the third episode, they talk about this famous tank battle in the 67 war with Syria and Egypt. And it's a battle that's famous because, not only did Israel get surprised, and they were attacked from the south and the north at the same time. It's a combined effort to try and wipe them out that failed, but they came very close to losing. And there's very much a kind of a sense of citizen army in Israel, because everybody has to serve. And so so many people, including Mike Rogoff, have a connection with the military. Mike can tell you he was an artillery officer in the Israeli army. But they have to run from their homes. I think the attack begins, if I remember, on Shabbat. And so they have to run from their homes and get to their posts. And one of the posts that the people are responsible for are the tank units that they have there in the northern part of Israel, there as you come close to Caesarea Philippi, which is leading to the valleys coming down from the mountain through Syria. It's where the Syrians are making their entrance to try and take over. And the Israeli tanks are older American and English-based tanks. And the Syrian tanks are newer Russian tanks. And in this series, they make the point that what makes a tank better typically is speed and the size of the gun. You know, a big gun going fast. And so the Russian tanks are better for that reason, coming down from the valley. They're faster, they're the best tanks that they have in the world at that point, if they give it to the Syrians who are coming down. The Israeli tanks are older and they break down. And they literally drive up to the line at that point with just one of their tanks operational. And so we're gonna see this spot. But the difference is, this one tank commander in particular, did you see this?
I listened to last week's this afternoon.
Yeah.
I watched that episode.
Yeah, this one tank commander takes his tank to the precipice of these areas that they are going to want us to stop and see. You can see down into the valley, and from that spot, he holds off the invading Syrian tank invasion with his one tank, with one wounded gunner. And the reason he's able to do it is because there's a design, I won't call it a flaw, just design in terms of how high the turret can elevate in the Russian tanks. It'll just go about that high. It doesn't go up. And so he holds the high ground, and he has greater, while his gun is smaller, he has greater versatility in terms of the lowering and raising of it, and he's able to shoot down at them, and they can't get up high enough to shoot at him. And he's a hero in terms of Israeli military, and we'll see that spot. It's just for military history buffs, a cool location. It's a historic military spot, but that's the moment that they're talking about in that tank battle there.
What does this have to do with the transfiguration?
Doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just down from the Mount of the Transfiguration. Yeah, it's a completely conflating of two moments in life. When you leave the Mount at Caesarea Philippi and come down, you go by that spot. And because you've been up high and you're coming down, well, and it doesn't have any religious significance unless you say something. Although it would make a neat children's sermon. Yeah. Other things that you all wanted to ask me as we catch up, or that you wanted to talk about.
The sidelight, you mentioned Jerome's translation of the Bible into Latin. And wasn't there an earlier significant effort to translate the Bible from Hebrew into Greek? And it's called a particular translation of some sort. And was Jerome working from that translation to translate into Latin?
Yeah. And that will let me segue into telling you about the silver amulets, and that you've seen and heard me speak of before. So the Hebrew scriptures are precious as they're captured in the Torah. And one of the interesting things about the Hebrew scriptures in synagogues around the world is how much they value their Torahs. They have a reverence for their Bible, their Torahs. That's an admirable act of devotion to see. That would be true for Zedek and the other synagogues here in town. And those are written copies of the scriptures. They're painstakingly done over time. But all of those, if you think about it, all of those scriptures are copied from something else, right? Some earlier scriptures. So our Bibles, even as the Bible I'm holding here, it's obviously a copy of scriptures recorded from another hand from another time. So the detective work is trying to find the oldest copies of scripture that you can find. What's the oldest copy, literal copy of scripture that you can find? The oral tradition behind some scriptures may be older than the oldest written copy we have. One of the things that's true about the Hebrew scriptures, which are initially written in Hebrew, is that they are translated into Greek. And that translation is called the Septuagint. And so some of the oldest, because Greek was the language of the civilized world, particularly the academic world. So some of the oldest copies of the Hebrew scriptures that we have, and some of the oldest Torahs, are what's called from the Septuagint, or written back into Hebrew, all right, by translating it from that Greek in the Septuagint, all right, restored back that way. When Jerome did like 387 AD, translates the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures into the Latin, he's working from the Septuagint, all right? That makes the Vulgate as a translation respected and important, but less reliable because it's a whole language removed from the original source language. You follow me? So he's not working from ancient Hebrew texts. And that's why the Dead Sea Scrolls, and are seeing that spot where they were discovered, is so important, because those are, you know, in the last century, discoveries of actual Hebrew scriptures that are written in Hebrew, pre-Septuagint, all right? So that leads the question to, well, what's the oldest actual scripture in the Bible that we have a written copy of, or any copy of, right? That's a question. The oldest copies of any New Testament scriptures that we have, in terms of actually written scriptures, are in the British Museum in London. And they're called the Codex Sinaiticus, which is a great story behind those. But it's very exciting to go and see those, because you're looking at Christian scriptures that are within like 200 years, some of them, of the life of Christ. We can get that far back. And we don't have the whole New Testament, but we have actual portions of it that's, you know, from that back. So older than that would be the Hebrew scriptures. What's the oldest Hebrew scriptures we have? Well, these books from the Dead Sea Scrolls, particularly the books of Isaiah, are very old, but there's something even older. And that was discovered in 1979 by a biblical archaeologist named Gabriel Barclay. And many of you knew Professor Jim Strange here, who was a member of Bayshore Baptist Church, a renowned biblical scholar, chair of the biblical and religion faculty at the University of South Florida, and a biblical archaeologist, and head of the professional societies for biblical archaeology, not just in the United States, but internationally. And so I had the joy and the privilege of talking with Dr. Strange about this over dinner. I had read about it and then asked him if to have dinner, and we got to talk, and he told me his own experiences with this, the discovery. But he knew Gabriel Barclay. So Barclay in 1979 is a biblical scholar deeply associated with Israel, and he's doing a dig at an ancient burial site there in Jerusalem, outside the old city. But then that makes sense, right? Because burials, many of them would have been outside the city. They still are. And he's doing this dig in a site that's been visited before. One of the problems with these digs is that they often, over hundreds and hundreds of years, have been vandalized. People have gone inside and taken things of value. I mean, whether it happens in the year 200 AD or whether it happens in the year, 100 BC, they're looking for valuable things that folks may have been buried with. And so you find sites, even if they're old and closed up, that have been vandalized before. And this one had been pretty well cleaned out. They just didn't think there was anything of much value there. And he's there working under the authority of the Israeli government. But they're still digging, and as part of the celebration that the nation of Israel takes in their wonderful archaeological and biblical history, they send often school groups to assist the archaeologists. And this particular day, he's got a group of middle school students from a Jewish middle school there who are helping in terms of the digging. All right, and as Strange tells the story, and as Barclay told it, Barclay, B-A-R-K-L-A-Y, told it to him, and then you can read this as, you can Google it up from here and read his account of it too. He has this one particular 14-year-old Jewish boy who's just a pain. His name is Nathan, and he keeps chattering at him the whole time. Professor Barclay, what happened to my big ear? What do you think was here? What was there? And Barclay said he couldn't get any work done because this obnoxious 14-year-old kept chattering to him the whole day. They're supposed to, he's thinking somebody send this guy back to 7th grade and get him out of here. Finally, in desperation, he gives him a little brush and a comb and says, go over there, because he knows there's nothing in it, it's just a floor, and brush that floor off in there, that other anteroom. All right, so Nathan goes over, the other room is brushing, and a little bit comes running back in and says, Professor Barclay. He says, what? He says, look what I found. And he holds up this piece of pottery that he says, the floor broke through and I found this piece of pottery there. And Barclay says, what? And he says, let me see that. And he looks at it and he realizes he's broken into a chamber they haven't found before. All right, and he says, come show me where this is. And he takes him in there and he shows it. And he says to him, good job, okay, you're getting an A in your archaeology classes here. And he says that he sends him out of the room. And he calls in the college students who are working with him, and he reports they have to work quickly because the story like this is going to be such a news sensation that they'll lose accessibility, they'll lose their ability to make initial judgments. So they start working overnight, and they bring in lights and start working. And what they pull up and find is a piece of burial pottery, and inside they find what's called the silver omulets. All right, and they're small. They're about the size of my pinky, and they're kind of wrapped up. The way in which you might have a necklace wrapped. You know those rectangular shaped gold necklaces that are popular? What?
Locket?
Well, not kind of like a locket, but more like a solid scroll roll. I see sometimes women wear these rectangular necklaces that have like writing on it, and it looks kind of like that. It's not large, like I say, about the size of my pinky, and only it's kind of rolled, so they have a hard time deciphering it. So they have to go to work on it, and eventually they're able to, with care, to see that what's inscribed there in Hebrew is number 624. Number 624 is the high priestly blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you. The Lord be gracious upon you and lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace both now and forever. That's a high watermark of biblical literature. We say that blessing often at the end of church. We say it at the end of almost every memorial. Think about that. We're still saying that blessing here in this church. Some of you know it and use it. The choir sings it. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you. It's the words of Moses over the children of Israel. And that's what's on that little silver amulet. They think it's on part of the burial plot there for about a 14-year-old girl. Which is touching, isn't it? Because if you had a 14-year-old daughter who died, you might bury that inscription with her, all right? And it dates, Barclay makes his best judgment and says he thinks it dates from about the year 571 BC, which is the oldest thing we have. It's challenged by a German scholar, All right, so it's sent then to a university in California. I forget which one. Particularly for thorough, they do like a 2-year study of the dating of it, and come back and release their report that they say it is in the strongest language, most definitely from at least 571 BC, if not earlier. That's the oldest, it's in Hebrew, not the Septuagint, but Hebrew, but it's the same thing that's in number 624 in the Septuagint. So it's validating of the continuity, you know, of unbroken tradition. And it's tender because it's there in that spot next to a 14-year-old daughter. And it's still the words we're saying in Christian churches today as we raise our hands. Now, what do you think the odds are that the oldest piece, written material scripture we could get would be that verse? Why wasn't it, you know, something like, and Lot tied his donkey to a tree, you know? Or, it could have been, but it's not. You know, it's that verse. That burial spot is immediately underneath the St. Andrew's Church, where we're scheduled to worship on Sunday morning in Jerusalem. And you can kind of look over the side down at it, but it's like you're looking at, you know, a vertical drop there. But that's where they were doing that dig. The church, which is the Church of Scotland, was already there because the British forces built it while they were there. But it was the members of that church and the priest who assisted Barclay in letting them dig across the night. They ran their extension cords up into the church. They brought them ham sandwiches and coffee. Well, maybe not ham sandwiches. And it's a source of identity for that church that they were seeing. What do you think it's like to be in a church that was built on that spot, literally from the ground up? So not only will we be able to see the church, but it's one of the things that Mike will show us on the day in which he shows us the museum in Israel. It's one of the places you'll get to see the actual silver monuments.
Within the past year, National Geographic has done, you know, an article on the finding of the scriptures. Now, I didn't have that whole story in it, as I recall, but it's something, if there's an interest in that, that's pretty easy to get to.
I should look it up because it is, I just think, an intriguing.
I'll try to bring, we've got it, I'll try to find it, bring it.
Dr. Strange told me over dinner, he said, Barclay was never the same. He said it was, he said he was a Jew, but more of a academic researching Jew. He said it was a profoundly spiritual moment for him that changed his life and his way of acting in the world, and that he became a devoutly expressive person of faith out of it. You can see that it was a moving thing for Dr. Strange in talking about the impact. And of course it would be. You know, it's a singular sort of moment, not just in one person's life, but in terms of the history of faith and scripture. Probably a better moment to see where the tank battle did. That's part of why I want to go to St. Andrew's Church on that Sunday too. Thank you. We used up the hour, and we started at the time, so I'll stop. I'll close us with a prayer. I'll linger a bit if there are things you want to ask individually, and then we'll meet next week, same time, Beth, right?
Yes. Yeah, and then I think maybe also the next week. Yeah, but
Yeah.
next week is normal.
Okay. Let's pray together. Holy God, thank you for our journey and for the way in which we traveled places that others have traveled before us, whose hands have treasured the relics of faith, whose prayers have punctuated the holy spots before us, whose pilgrimage of devotion have preceded ours. Thank you for the journey of your people across time to the Holy Land. Help us as we journey in our own faith, that we also might be in the company of those pilgrims, that the sacred scriptures might come alive for us, that in seeing and being present, we might be nurtured and strengthened in our own faith and in our own witness. We pray in the name of Jesus, who knew what it meant to walk and to travel with friends. Amen.
Amen.